Sam Elliott built his career on characters of quiet strength, men who rarely needed words to command respect. Yet behind one of his most memorable roles, there was a story that audiences never saw. The set of Tombstone was filled with chaos, heartbreak, and decisions that changed the movie forever. Elliott has now shared the hidden truth of what unfolded, and his confession changes how we see the film. What he revealed was not about action or gunfights, but about loss, compromise, and the weight of carrying on when a vision begins to collapse. The fragile beginning. When filming began in the spring of 1993, Sam Elliott felt something rare in Hollywood: genuine pride. At 50, he had built a career on rugged supporting roles, but this time, stepping into the boots of Virgil Earp, Wyatt's older brother, he sensed the opportunity to give weight to a character rooted not in flash or bravado, but in duty. Kevin Jara's script had impressed him from the moment he read it. Unlike so many westerns that lived only for shootouts and standoffs, this one cared about the men behind the guns. Every character had dignity, flaws, and a purpose that went beyond cliches. For Elliott, who valued truth above spectacle, it felt like the perfect fit. But from the earliest days on set in Arizona, his optimism began to crack. Kevin Jara, as gifted as he was on the page, had never directed a film. Elliott noticed the problem almost immediately. By the third day, scenes were crawling. Jara favored long, sweeping master shots that looked like something from the golden age of John Ford, but drained the energy out of a script that demanded intimacy and fire. Close-ups that might have captured the heat in an actor's eyes were abandoned in favor of wide frames that left the performances adrift. The crew began whispering their doubts. Cinematographer William Fraker, seasoned and respected, tried gently to push Jara toward different choices. But Jara resisted, clinging stubbornly to his vision. Elliott didn't speak out loudly, he rarely did, but he felt the unease settle in his bones. He wasn't worried for his own role. He was worried for the survival of the film, for the fragile story he had believed in. By the end of the first month, the production was behind schedule. The budget was groaning, and the Christmas release date Disney had already announced loomed like a guillotine. The studio lost patience. Jar, who had dreamed this story into life, was quietly dismissed. For the cast, it was like watching the ship's captain thrown overboard mid-voyage. Elliott later admitted the sadness was heavy. He admired Jara's writing, respected his heart, and to see him forced out so abruptly felt like betrayal by necessity. George P. Cosmatos was brought in to steady the ship, a man known for discipline and control. Yet, as Elliott would later reveal, it wasn't Cosmatos who truly kept the production afloat. It was Kurt Russell who began writing nightly shot lists, streamlining the script, and acting as the uncredited director. Elliott respected Russell's determination, but in his heart, he knew something had already been lost. Nearly 30 pages of Jara's original script, pages that gave Virgil and Morgan Earp their most human, emotional moments, were cut away. What remained was still strong, but the soul of the story had been weakened. And Elliott, loyal as ever, carried the quiet sorrow of knowing that the role he cherished had already been diminished before the real fight had even begun. The Ghost Director and the Vanishing Pages. After Kevin Jar was forced out, George P. Cosmatos officially took the director's chair, but the truth of how the movie survived was far more complicated. Sam Elliott later admitted that it was Kurt Russell who quietly took command, even though his name would never appear in the credits. Each night, Russell would meet with members of the crew, drafting new shot lists and rewriting pages to ensure they could stay on schedule. Val Kilmer, who lived in Russell's guest room during production, recalled how they would spend long hours piecing together the next day's work. For Elliott, watching this unfold felt both reassuring and heartbreaking. Reassuring because someone had stepped up, but heartbreaking because it meant the film was no longer the ensemble story Jar had dreamed of. Russell and the producers cut close to 30 pages from the script. These weren't throwaway lines, but scenes that gave depth to the Earp brothers as a family. Elliott later confessed that if he had known his role would be reduced so drastically, he might not have accepted it at all. Virgil's struggles, his responsibilities, his emotional weight, all of it shrank as the film narrowed its focus to Wyatt and Doc Holliday. Elliott described sitting in a bar during production when a crew member told him he should have been cast as Wyatt. He smiled faintly, took a sip of his beer, and replied, "Tell me about it." That quiet remark revealed the disappointment he carried, but rarely voiced. Still, Elliott refused to abandon the project. He believed in the cast, in the power of Jar's original script, and in the bond that had formed among the actors. To salvage something of Virgil's presence, he slipped fragments of dialogue back into his scenes, protecting small pieces of character that otherwise would have been erased. It was a subtle act of rebellion, born not of ego, but of devotion to a role he felt deserved more than the cutting room floor. In his silence and persistence, Elliott embodied Virgil himself, a man who held firm to duty even when the world around him was crumbling. Fractures behind the camera. As the weeks dragged on, the set of Tombstone became less like a creative space and more like a battlefield. The change from Jara to Cosmatos was never smooth. George Cosmatos brought discipline, but it came at a cost. His approach was sharp-edged, prioritizing efficiency and control, and many on the crew felt suffocated. Cinematographer William Fraker, a veteran of the industry, clashed with Cosmatos repeatedly. Fraker wanted artistry. Cosmatos demanded speed. Their disagreements grew so heated that one day they drove golf carts straight into each other in a reckless act of frustration. 17 crew members eventually left the production under Cosmatos' strict watch. Sam Elliott, quiet by nature, absorbed this chaos with a heavy heart. He wasn't a man to shout or stir fights, but he could feel the weight pressing down. He had joined Tombstone believing in its script, its camaraderie, and its vision of the Earp family. Now, much of that spirit felt fractured. He described the shoot as brilliant and painful at the same time. Brilliant because the cast gave everything they had, painful because behind the lens the movie often seemed moments away from falling apart. Adding to the tension was the looming deadline. Disney demanded the film be ready for a Christmas release in 1993, forcing the crew into grueling schedules. Days stretched long, reshoots multiplied, and exhaustion became routine. Jare's original material was pushed aside, with only about 15 of his filmed moments surviving into the final cut. Elliott continued to show up every day, steady as Virgil Earp. But he could not ignore the sadness of watching Jara's deeper story vanish piece by piece. And yet, amid the anger and fatigue, a fragile unity formed. Kurt Russell kept writing nightly plans, Val Kilmer threw his weight behind him, and the rest of the cast stayed the course. Elliott knew the film might not be the layered masterpiece it had started as, but he still believed it could be saved. What kept him going was loyalty to his fellow actors, to Jara's words, and to the promise of finishing the story no matter the cost. The rival in the shadows. While the cast of Tombstone struggled through reshoots and long nights, another storm was brewing just down the road. In New Mexico, Kevin Costner was filming Wyatt Earp with director Lawrence Kasdan. Unlike Tombstone, Costner's project had the luxury of time, a budget more than twice as large, and the backing of a studio eager to showcase one of Hollywood's biggest stars at the height of his career. For Kurt Russell, already weighed down by the chaos on his own set, this rival production became a source of anxiety. He wondered if audiences would even care about their smaller, scrappier film when a grand 3-hour epic loomed on the horizon. Sam Elliott remembered one evening at a Holiday Inn when Russell sat restless, filled with doubt about whether their movie would survive the competition. Elliott, always blunt, asked him what he was so worried about. Russell tried to explain the bigger picture, the money, the studio power, the star wattage of Costner. but Elliott cut him off with words that carried the same rugged certainty he brought to Virgil Earp. They haven't got this ing script, and they haven't got this ing cast for Elliott. That was the truth that mattered. He had seen firsthand how Jara's dialogue gave the story its soul, and how actors like Val Kilmer, Michael Biehn, and Powers Booth were pouring themselves into their roles. He knew that no matter how polished Costner's version looked, it could never replicate the raw energy and chemistry on the Tombstone set. Even as Russell kept sweating over schedules and budgets, Elliott held firm in his belief that their film had already captured lightning in a bottle. History would prove him right. Tombstone, released in December 1993, earned $56 million at the box office, more than double what Wyatt Earp pulled in the following June. Costner's film, though beautifully shot, dragged under its own weight, while Tombstone became a cult classic quoted by fans for decades. Elliott never doubted it. He had trusted in the words on the page, the grit of the cast, and the truth that heart always outshines spectacle. Virgil's quiet weight. For most audiences, Tombstone is remembered for Kurt Russell's fierce Wyatt Earp and Val Kilmer's unforgettable Doc Holliday. Their lines became legend, quoted endlessly in bars, dorm rooms, and fan circles. Yet in the shadows of that fame was Sam Elliott's Virgil, the older brother who carried a different kind of burden. Elliott later admitted that the cuts to the script robbed Virgil of nearly 30 pages of material, moments of family, moral struggle, and quiet reflection. Without those connective scenes, Virgil became more of a background figure than the fully realized heart Jara had written. Elliott confessed that had he known his role would be reduced so severely, he might have turned it down entirely. Still, he refused to let Virgil disappear. On set, he found subtle ways to slip fragments of character back in. Lines whispered, gestures held a little longer, pauses that spoke volumes. One of the most overlooked moments in the film is when Virgil rescues a child before the violence of the OK Corral erupts. It passes quickly, almost buried in the chaos, but it reveals who Virgil really is, a man acting out of duty, not rage. That single action carries the weight of Elliott's entire performance, a reminder that justice, not vengeance, was the Earp family's true compass. Critics and scholars looking back now often call Elliott the moral anchor of Tombstone. His voice, weathered and steady, embodied the price of responsibility. He was not the gunslinger chasing glory, he was the weary lawman forced to make choices that left scars. That sense of unyielding duty mirrored Elliott himself, who stayed loyal to the film even when it betrayed parts of his character. He carried on because he believed the story deserved to be finished. Time has softened the sting of those missing pages, but the sadness lingers in Elliott's words. He knew what Virgil could have been, yet he also knew he had given everything he could to protect what remained. In the end, his performance became less about lines spoken and more about silence, about a presence that grounded the chaos around him. A legacy of triumph and loss. When Tombstone finally reached theaters on December 24, 1993, the exhaustion of its creation was still fresh for the cast. 88 grueling days of filming, crew departures, reshoots, and sleepless nights had left scars, but the film stood ready. Audiences embraced it instantly. Val Kilmer's sharp-tongued Doc Stoll scenes, Kurt Russell's Wyatt radiated determination, and Sam Elliott's Virgil quietly anchored the family's sense of duty. The movie grossed $56 million in North America, far surpassing expectations and doubling its modest $25 million budget. 6 months later, when Wyatt Earp arrived bloated with length and weighed down by Costner's epic ambitions, the verdict was clear. Elliott's faith had been prophetic. Tombstone would endure while Wyatt Earp faded into near obscurity. Yet Elliott's pride came with an ache he never fully shook. He told interviewers years later that he remained proud of what they had built, but haunted by the knowledge of what had been lost. Kevin Jara's original script had promised a richer tapestry, where Virgil and Morgan stood alongside Wyatt and Doc with equal weight. Elliott often said he wished audiences could have seen those pages, the scenes of quiet family dinners, the moments of laughter and connection that were stripped away in the race to sharpen the story. For him, the cuts left a hole that never closed. Still, he recognized the strange poetry of it all. Just as Virgil Earp was written as the brother who carried responsibility without glory, Elliott found himself in the same role. His Virgil did not win the spotlight, but he bore the weight of duty to the film. He kept faith when others faltered, delivered truth even when it was trimmed, and helped ensure that the story crossed the finish line. Decades later, fans and critics have come to appreciate that strength. In retrospectives, Elliott's Virgil is often called the moral compass of Tombstone, a presence that grounded the fire and spectacle around him. For Elliott, the memory of Tombstone remains both brilliant and painful, a triumph carved out of struggle, and a reminder that even legends are born from sacrifice. Sam Elliott's quiet confession shows us that behind the triumph of Tombstone was a story of loss, sacrifice, and resilience. He gave Virgil Earp a soul, even when much of it was stripped away, and in doing so left fans with a character who still lingers decades later. Do you think Tombstone would have been even greater if those missing scenes had survived? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories behind the movies you thought you knew.